Yesterday marked 12 years since the Marikana massacre, where 34 protesting Lonmin mine workers were killed and 78 were wounded. Justice Minister Thembi Simelane yesterday confirmed that 352 million had been given to families affected by the Marikana massacre. Some family members have come out saying they have not received any compensation from the government. Attorney for Marikana families, Asenati Tukela, joins us for this conversation. Asenati, perhaps to start the conversation here, the compensation that was issued had gone through a compensation panel, had gone through a courtroom process where there was extensive litigation on the on the very question, what is due to the families, and there was ample opportunity for that to be challenged and at a later stage dispersed. The question to perhaps ask here is, can the families make another claim through the courts after the fact of the first case?
Thank you, Oliver, and thank you for having us. I hope I'm audible on your side. I think that there is a large misrepresentation around compensation for Marikana, the civil damages aspect.
I can hear you now. I can hear you now.
Yes, I'm saying it seems there is a large misrepresentation around compensation for Marikana. And this is because whenever the state reports around compensation and the large part that they have compensated the victims of Marikana, they deliberately collate all Marikana victims and all of the litigation around Marikana and around compensation for Marikana into one. And they report about it as one to make it seem like the state has given the necessary response and the reparations needed for Marikana. That is not true, and I must clarify it, Oliver. There's different categories of victims of Marikana. There's the injured and arrested workers who did not die or were not killed in Marikana by the police. That's one aspect of the compensation. There's also the families of the deceased mine workers, which we as SERE represent, which is a different component of the Marikana victims. Then there's also the other workers who were arrested and tortured and brutally assaulted by the workers after Marikana. So it's different categories to Marikana, but the state deliberately reports about the compensation made as one collated compensatory award to all Marikana victims to make it seem like any outstanding claim for damages is now coming from a point of greed from the families. The families, Oliver, in 2015 launched a civil case against the Minister of Police for compensation, and I'll break down the compensation. The first demand that was made by the families was that the president or a member of government must come forward and apologize to the families for the atrocities and the violation of human rights caused on their loved ones. The second one was in relation to the pain and the suffering and the psychiatric injury caused as a result of the trauma and the death and the brutality of Marikana. The other component of the claim, of the civil claim of the families, was in relation to the deprivation of parental care and spousal care, and it was made in terms of the Constitution. The last one was a loss of support, Oliver, and in 2018, the state called us to the table to discuss a settlement arrangement around only one component of the claim, which is loss of support. That was settled and paid for 34 out of the 36 families that we act for, which means 1 of 5 demands has been addressed by the state. But the other 4 outstanding, the state has refused to make any intention towards settling and making compensation, which has compelled us to now proceed to court to see if we can have ventilation on the 4 outstanding heads of damages that we made to the state. So it's untrue and it's a misrepresentation that there has been compensation and that the outstanding part of the damages claim is now coming from a point of greed or from a point of dissatisfaction by the families. The state hasn't actually compensated in relation to the families.
Okay,
but they do collect.
Break down the 352 million that the state claimed has been paid out in compensation. You outlined 3 different classes of compensation. That is for injured workers, that is for deceased, the families of deceased workers, and that is for workers and those who have been arrested and subsequently tortured and faced brutality during that process. Those 3 different categories, what quantums of monies were dispersed into each category?
So we represent, Oliver, 36 families of the deceased mine workers. Of the 36 families, there's different beneficiaries or dependents in each family. So there would be children, there would be the wife, there would be the father, the mother, and every other person in the family who was dependent on the deceased mine worker. So we have a total of 320 claimants in relation to the families. Out of the 300 million that the state is making public announcements that they have compensated, around 2018, the 320 dependents that we are claiming on behalf received a total of 71 million. And we must break it down, Oliver. It was only in relation to loss of support, from an understanding that the deceased mine workers were breadwinners for their families. And now that they have been killed in Marikana, there has been deprivation of socio-economic security for the families. So the state settled only in relation to loss of support. But it is not 71 million being dispersed equally to among 320 people, because the compensation was in relation to the level of socio-economic support that the dependent or the claimant would otherwise rely on from the deceased mine worker. So it was dispersed evenly among 320 people, claimants. The remainder would now account for the injured and arrested mine workers, which we do not represent, and I would respectfully not get into those details.
Yeah, unfortunately, that's all we have time for. We're going to have to leave it there. Asenati, thank you so much for your time. Really do appreciate it. Asenati Tukela is an attorney at SERI representing the deceased Marikana families, family members of deceased Marikana workers. We'll bring you more on these conversations.